Hello again, everyone. Now, this is going to be part two and a continuance because the video I was recording, literally just cut off randomly. Who knows what's going on? Ancestors probably trying to tell me something. Anyway, on the last video, we ended with Abigail Hobbs, and she confessed in April of 1692. So to continue, Mary Lacy Sr. confessed in July 1692. Mary Osgood confessed in September 1692. The ones that died in prison. Sarah Osborne died in jail in Boston on May 10th, 1692. Roger Toothaker died in jail in Boston on June 16th, 1692. Anne Foster died in jail on December 3rd, 1692. Lydia Dustin died in jail on March 10th, 1693. And then the ones that escaped from prison. John Alden Jr., Edward Bishop Jr., Sarah Bishop, Mary Bradbury, William Barker Sr., Andrew Carrier, Catherine Carey, Philip English, Mary English, Edward Farrington. The list of those that was never indicted: Sarah Bassett, Mary Black, Bethia Carter Jr., Bethia Carter Sr., Sarah Cloyce, Elizabeth Hart, William Hobbs, Thomas Ferrer Sr., William Proctor, Sarah Proctor, Susanna Roots, Anne Sears, and Tituba. The ones who evaded arrest were George Jacobs Jr. and Daniel Andrews. Other victims include 2 dogs who were shot or killed after being suspected of witchcraft. Most of the Salem witch trial victims were women, but men were accused and executed too. Although some of the early victims were poor, social outcasts from Salem village, the accusation slowly spread to all types of people from all types of backgrounds, according to the book Death in Salem, The Private Lives Behind 1692 Witch Hunt. Which, if you're interested in this, that is a very good book. In the book it says, most of the victims were women. Everyone knew that witchcraft was largely a female perversity, but the reasoning stopped there. The over 150 people singled out for social and legal ostracism over the course of 1692 included every age, social, echelon, and background, rich and poor, young and old, feeble and sharp-witted. In Andover, 17 alleged witches were identified in a single afternoon sting known as a touch test. The villagers collected in the meeting house. Then one by one, the women were blindfolded and led up to 2 of Salem's riding girls. In the woman's touch evaded the girl's convulsions, it proved that she was guilty. The logic seems to have been that physical contact with an actual witch would have drawn the evil spirits back out of the victim. So, like sheep herded over a cliff, Andover women were seized, bound, served warrants, and loaded into the back of ox carts for the 4 or 5 hour trip to Salem jail. Their frantic relatives browbeating them the entire way. The ulterior reason for their persecution sometimes surfaced at the trial. Often it was little more than a bad reputation or malicious gossip, repackaged and embroidered over decades. A human fatality or eccentricity might be trotted as evidence. Sometimes it was the fruit of the protracted family feud, an insult uttered in haste, or a personal indiscretion, like Martha Corey's, that was the community refused to forget. So where were the accused imprisoned at? Due to a large number of accused witches, the prisoners were kept in multiple jails in Salem, Ipswich, and Boston. According to the book, A Delusion of Satan, the full story of the Salem witch trials. Very good book, by the way. The accused witches were considered dangerous prisoners and were kept in dungeons underneath the jails away from the regular prisoners. The book says, as the most dangerous inmates, the witches were kept in the dungeons. These were perpetually dark, bitterly cold, and so damp that water ran down the walls. They reeked of unwashed human bodies and excrement. They enclosed as much agony as anywhere human beings could have lived. The stone dungeons of Salem Town Prison were discovered in 1950s in St. Peter's Street when the site was excavated to build a New England Telephone Company building. In 1692, they stood under a wooden structure 20 feet square known as the Witch Jail. Since they were so close to the banks of the tidal river, they were probably infested with water rats. Certainly, they were a breeding ground for disease, but accused witches were worse off than the other prisoners. Their limbs were weighted down, and their movements were restricted by monocles chained to the walls, so that their specters could less easily escape to wreak havoc. The dungeons forever changed people, and the ones who were lucky enough to survive the prison or escape the gallows often suffered for the rest of their lives. Such is the case of Dorcas Good, the 4-year-old daughter of Sarah Good, who was accused of witchcraft in March of 1692 and spent 7 to 8 months in jail before being released, according to the book The Salem Witch Trials Reader. 18 years later, her father, William Good, was to write that she was in prison 7 or 8 months, and being chained in the dungeon was so hardly used and terrified that she hath ever since been very chargeable, having little or no reason to govern herself. But very chargeable, he meant by a financial burden. When she came out, and for the rest of her days he had to pay a keeper to take care of her. While in prison, the accused were repeatedly humiliated by being forced to undergo physical examinations of their bodies. The examiners were looking for physical evidence that the accused was a witch, such as a mark of the devil, or a teat from which the witch's familiar was believed to have nursed from. During the examinations, the prisoners, who were mostly elderly, were stripped naked in front of the group of people, and their bodies were poked and prodded, and any suspicious mark or moles found were pricked with needles. The female prisoners' breasts were often examined multiple times a day for signs of lactation or breastfeeding, and the appearance of their breasts were recorded and discussed in the courtroom. In his book Salem Witchcraft, with an account of Salem Village and a history of opinions on witchcraft and kindred spirits, historian and former Salem Mayor Charles W. Upham described his disgust over this treatment to the prisoners. The mind loathes the thought of handling in this way refined and sensitive females and matronal characters of person of either sex with infirmities of body rendered scarred by years. The results of the examinations were reduced to written reports going into detail, and among the evidence in the trial spread before the court and jury. Where were the accused questioned and tried? To determine if there was an actual case against the accused, they were usually taken either to Salem Village Meeting House, to Reverend Samuel Parris's house, to Ingersoll Tavern at Salem Village, or to the Beatles Tavern in Salem Town. They were questioned by a judge in front of a jury, which decided whether or not to indict the accused on charges of witchcraft. The trials were then held in the Salem courthouse, which was located in the center of Washington Street, about 100 feet south of Lynn Street, opposite of where the Masonic Temple now stands. This courthouse was torn down in 1760, but the plaque dedicated to the courthouse is still seen today on the wall of the Masonic Temple on Washington Street. The executions took place on a small hill called Proctor's Ledge, at the base of the Gallows Hill in Salem town. The victims were hanged by the neck by a rope tied to a tree. Contrary to popular belief, none of the victims were burned at the stake. The reason is because English law only allowed death by burning to be used against men who committed high treason, and only after they had been hanged until almost dead, quartered, and drawn. The English considered it an unspeakable death for women since it involved nudity. Burning at the stake was more popular in countries with a strong Catholic Church because it did not involve the shedding of blood, which was not allowed by the Roman Catholic doctrine, and it ensured that the victim would not have a body to take with them in the afterlife. After each execution took place, the victim's body was cut down and placed in a nearby rock crevice or buried in the shallow grave somewhere on the execution site, according to a paper written by William P. Upham for the Peabody Historical Society in 1903. It is well known that the victims executed as witches on Gallows Hills in Salem in 1692 were thrown into mere shallow graves or crevices in the ledge under the gallows, where the nature of the ground did not allow complete burial, so that it was stated at the time that portions of the bodies were hardly covered at all. As convicted witches, they were not allowed a Christian burial in consecrated ground. Relatives of several victims, Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, George Jacobs, etc., reportedly retrieved the bodies of their loved ones and gave them a Christian burial on the family property. It is not known what happened to the unclaimed bodies, or if there were any unclaimed bodies, but if there are, they are most likely still buried in the shallow graves at the execution site. Almost immediately after the Salem witch trials came to an end, the residents of Salem began to feel ashamed of what had happened during the witch trials. They still believed in witches and the devil, but they had doubts that so many people could have been guilty of a crime, and they feared that many innocent people had been put to death. The colony also began to suffer from frequent droughts, crop failures, smallpox outbreaks, Native American attacks, and other disasters, and the colonists worried that the mistakes made during the Salem witch trials had angered their god. On December 17th, 1697, Governor Stoughton issued a proclamation in hopes of making amends with God. The proclamation suggested that there should be observed a day of prayer with fasting throughout the province, so that all God's people may put away that which hath stirred God's holy jealousy against his land, and that he would help wherein we have done amiss to do so no more, and especially that whatever mistakes on either hand have fallen into, referring to the late tragedy raised among us by Satan and his instruments, though the awful judgment of God, he would humble us before the pardon all the errors and people that desire to love his name. The colony held the day of prayer on January 15th, 1697, which was known as the Day of Official Humiliation. On October 17th, 1711, at the urging of the surviving convicted witches and their families, the colony passed a bill clearing some of the names of the convicted witches. Not every victim was named in the bill, though, because some families of the victims did not want their family member listed. The bill states, Province of Massachusetts Bay, Anna Regni, Anna Regina Decimo, an act to remove the attainders of George Burroughs and others for witchcraft. Far as much in the year of our Lord 1692. Several towns within the province were infested with a horrible witchcraft or possession of devils, and at a special court of Oyer and Termina holden at Salem in the county of Essex is the same year, 1692, George Burroughs of Wells, John Proctor, George Jacobs, John Willard, Giles Corey, and Martha, his wife, Rebecca Nurse, and Sarah Good, all of Salem, aforesaid, Elizabeth Howe of Ipswich, Mary Eatsy, Sarah Wild, and Abigail Hobbs, all of Topsfield, Manuel Wardwell, Mary Parker, Martha Carrier, Abigail Faulkner, Anne Foster, Rebecca Eames, Mary Post, Mary Lacey, all of Andover, Mary Bradbury of Salisbury, Dorcas Hoare of Beverly were severely indicted, convicted, and attainted of witchcraft, and some of them put to death, others lying still under like sentence of the said court and liable to have the same executed upon them. The influence, the energy of the evil spirit, so great at that time, acting in and upon those who were the principal accusers and witnesses proceeding so far as to cause a prosecution to be had of persons of known and good reputation, which caused a great dissatisfaction and a stop to be put thereunto until their majesties' pleasure should be known therein, and upon a representation thereof accordingly made her late majesty Queen Mary the second of blessed memory, by her royal letter given at her court at Whitehall, and 15 of April 1693, was graciously pleased and approved to care and circumspection therein, and to will and require that in all proceedings against persons accused of witchcraft, of being possessed by the devil, the greatest moderation and all due circumspection be used so far as the same may be without impediment to the ordinary course of justice. And some of the principal accusers and witnesses in those dark and severe prosecutions have since discovered themselves to be persons of profligate and vicious conversations upon the humble petition and suit of several of said persons, and of the children of others of whose parents were executed. Be it declared and enacted by His Excellency the Governor, Council, and Representatives authority of the same, that the several convictions in General Court assembled, and by the judgment and attainders against the said George Burroughs, John Proctor, George Jacobs, John Willard, Giles Corey, Martha Corey, Rebecca Nurse, Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Mary Etsy, Sarah Wilds, Abigail Hobbs, Samuel Wardwell, Mary Parker, Martha Carrier, Abigail Faulkner, Anne Foster, Rebecca Eames, Martha Carrier, Mary Post, Mary Lacey, Mary Bradbury, Dorcas Hoare, and any of them be and are hereby reversed, made, and declared to be null and void to all intents, constitutionalism, and purposes wheresoever, as if no such convictions, judgments, and attainders had ever been had or given, and that no penalties or forfeitures of goods or chattels be by the said judgment and attainders of either of them had or incurred, any law, usage, or custom to the contrary notwithstanding, and that no sheriff, constable, gaoler, or other officer shall be liable to any prosecution in the law of anything they then legally did in the execution of their respective offenses, made and passed by the great and general court of assembly of Her Majesty's province of the Massachusetts Bay and New England, held at Boston, and the 17th day of October, 1711. The victims and their family, named in the bill, were also paid restitution totaling L600, which was divided up among them. Officials distributed the money in Salem in January and February of 1712. In 1867, former Salem Mayor Charles Wentworth Upham wrote a book about the Salem witch trials titled Salem Witchcraft, with an account of Salem village and the history of opinions on witchcraft and kindred spirits, during which he applauded the victims for their bravery and courage. The sufferers in 1692 deserve to be held to grateful remembrance for having illustrated the dignity of which our nature is capable, for having shown that integrity of conscience is an armor which protects the peace of the soul against all the powers that can assail it, and for having given an example that will be seen of all and in all times of a courage, constancy, and faithfulness of which all are capable, and which can give the victory over infirmities of age, weaknesses, and pains of the body, and the most appalling combination of outrages to the mind and heart that can be accumulated by the violence and the wrath of man. On August 28, 1957, Massachusetts Governor Foster Furcolo signed a bill into law that officially apologized for the Salem witch trials and declared the name of some of the remaining victims not listed in the 1711 law. One, Anne Pudieter, and certain other persons, yet did not state the other victims' names. In 1992, on the 300th anniversary of the trials, the city of Salem built the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, and the city of Danvers built the Salem Village Witchcraft Victims Memorial in honor of the victims. On October 31st, 2001, the state amended the 1957 apology, clearing the names of the remaining victims. Chapter 145 of the Resolves of 1957 is hereby amended by striking out, in line 1, the words 1, Anne Pudieter, and certain other persons, and inserting in place thereof the following words: Anne Pudieter, Bridget Bishop, Susanna Martin, Alice Parker, Margaret Scott, and will not read. According to the Salem Award Foundation website, there are roughly 25 million people around the world who are descended from the Salem witch trials victims and other participants in the trial. So, I know, that was a lot. But one thing that comes to my mind is every time that there is a true crime case, and something is there that people automatically assume is the occult or satanic, or even as light of the light that Wicca is, oh my God, it has to be Wiccan. Stuff like that is literally where we've got these witch trials. There probably was some witches that was killed or pardoned or whatever. A few of them were spiritualists, or there's many different kinds. But in today's world, we see things that we assume are of a religion that we ourselves do not practice. For example, me, as a Satanist, I can look at a crime scene where there is a right side up cross and a fish. It is not proper for me to assume that the crime was committed by a Christian. But yet so many people see random things, sigils, sage, upside down crosses. They assume that it was a blood sacrifice or whatever, and they automatically assume that it was the occult, or it was a Satanist, or it was a voodoo practitioner, or whatever, simply because they do not understand it. And when people don't understand things and they make accusations about things like this, that is where the witch trials come in. So many people were put to death. Children were stuck in rat-infested dungeons underneath a jail. A 4-year-old baby was in a dungeon underneath the jail. And in that jail, there was rapists, there was murderers, there was all kinds of horrific people. But yet, a 4-year-old child was in a dungeon underneath them because they were accused of being a witch. Let that make sense. I will probably be doing some more random videos on this because each one of these victims deserve a voice, and there is no way that they can speak for themselves at this point. But I hope that over the years they have been able to find their peace, that they have been able to look down, look up, look around, however that goes, and see their loved ones, see the future generations. And I hope that they know at this point that they are part of our history. And because of them, so many things have changed. And not only for Salem, but around the world. So many things have changed based on laws and punishments and stuff like that because of what happened to them. And I truly hope that every single one of them have a place of peace and that they can forever remain there. Much love, everybody.